incredibly good president, I thought. Anyway, our next subtopic would be concern over internal security and communism in the United States. All of a sudden now, post-World War II, we're a little worried about what Russia's doing over there in Europe, and we have a concern about communism. Not only in Russia, but possible communists within what? The United States. Okay? So concern over internal security and communism in the United States. Now, Truman actually tried to do something about this before he was elected to his own term, because during this time in our history, 1946, 47, 48, etc., there were serious security concerns within the federal government, thinking that we had communists within our own government. And in 1947, when he was serving the remainder of FDR's term, Truman asked the FBI to investigate the loyalty of all federal employees. He wanted to make sure that anyone that worked for the federal government was not communist, that they were loyal to America, because rumors were circulating that you had all kinds of communists that had infiltrated into the American government as a result of the end of World War II. So during this time in our history, there were serious security concerns within the federal government. And in 1947, when he was serving the remainder of FDR's term, President Truman asked the FBI to investigate the loyalty of all federal employees. Between 1947 and the end of 1951, during that 4-year period of time, about 3 million federal employees were investigated and cleared. That means they weren't communists. Okay? So between 1947 and the end of 1951, they had investigated more than 3 million federal employees that had been cleared. Okay, so they investigated that many and they said, no, you're fine, you don't have any communist ties. Of those 3 million federal employees that had been investigated and cleared, they actually found 2,000 that were under question during the investigation. And what did they do so they wouldn't get in trouble? Instead of getting fired, they resigned. So about 2,000 federal employees resigned after being investigated, more than likely because they found something out about them that wasn't good. That happens sometimes, you know. If I do something dumb as a teacher and it's fireable, maybe they don't want to fire me because it would be bad PR, so they'd say, you know, we're going to fire you, but if you want to save face, you can just resign. That happens a lot of times. Okay, not necessarily good, but it happens. Well, of the more than 3 million federal employees they investigated, 212 actually were fired as security risks. 212 were fired as security risks. And Truman's philosophy was, we got 212 people out of our federal government that were disloyal or communist. So it was worth it to him. Now, at that time, they were investigating individuals that worked for the federal government. Also during that time, the FBI and the Department of Defense began an extensive investigation of any communist activity within the United States. So now they broadened out their search for communists beyond just the federal government employees. They didn't want any communist activity in the United States. And if you can believe this, before the end of 1948, they actually indicted, tried, and sentenced to prison 11 communist leaders that were working in the United States. So by the end of 1948, the FBI and Department of Defense had sniffed out 11 communist leaders that had been indicted, tried, and sentenced to prison that were actually doing communist activities within the United States. Well, that caused us a little bit of alarm that we had that many communist leaders in our country. So, because of their findings, Congress passed the Internal Security Act of 1950. So because of these 11 communist leaders that they found through their investigation, that being the FBI and the Department of Defense, Congress took more precautions and passed the Internal Security Act of 1950. Now this required any communist organization in the United States to do the following two things. This law required all communist organizations in the United States to do the following. Now what they're saying is, before we have to go sniff you out, we're going to give you an opportunity to do the following. What might be something they would want those communist organizations to do? Well, you probably want them to leave or stop, but that probably isn't going to happen. What would be the next best thing? If I was thinking in here, you know, I got kids in here that are disloyal to me. I don't know if I can sniff them out, and I'm probably going to have to live with the fact that they're disloyal. So what might I want to know about you 28 kids? Which of you are actually disloyal? Just come out and tell me that you don't agree with me. So the first thing this act did is it required that these communist organizations submit their membership lists to the Attorney General. So at least we knew who they were. Okay? So if you had a communist organization in the United States, you were required to submit a list to the Office of the Attorney General. What else might you want to know about that communist organization other than their members and leaders? What else might you want to know? How much power they have? What talks and what walks? Money talks and BS walks, right? So they wanted to know the financial operations. What are you worth? If you are a communist organization, you will supply us with a membership list, and you will supply us with your financial operation, how much money you have in your organization. Those were the two things the Internal Security Act of 1950 did. What would they do to an organization that didn't give them that information? They would indict them, try them, and sentence them to prison. So they were giving you an opportunity to come out front and say what your story is. Okay, with that said, our next subtopic you can write and be ready for tomorrow is the conflict in Korea. But what I'm going to do is we're going to get a little jump start on this movie today to make sure that we can get it done by the end of the period tomorrow. So that's what we'll do. We're going to watch this election of 1948. It's very good. I think you will enjoy it. I'd like you to have your notebooks out though, and I want you to note anything of significance about this election that I did not tell you in the lecture.